Hello and welcome again to the Rider Review. This is Eric Corrupt Rider, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1992 movie titled Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X is a biographical drama that runs for 3 hours and 21 minutes long. It is directed, produced, and co-written by Spike Lee. It is based on a novel by Alex Haley. The other co-writer includes Arnold Pearl, and the other co-producer is Marvin Worth. The score was done by Terrence Blanchard. The cinematography was done by Ernest Dickerson, and the editing was done by Barry Alexander Brown. And it stars Denzel Washington, Angela Bassett, Delroy Lindo, Al Freeman, Christopher Plummer, and many cameo appearances too, and plenty of archive footage that also goes around. This movie was nominated for 2 awards, including Best Leading Actor, Denzel Washington, who sadly lost out to Al Pacino for his performance in Scent of a Woman, and the other nominee included Best Costume Design by Ruth E. Carter. She too also lost out. I don't remember who she lost out against, but we'll leave it up to our intelligent audience members. Directed by Spike Lee, this over-budgeted, very lengthy biopic, Malcolm X tells most of every facet of his life, as he begins as a young boy growing up in a poor Nebraska community, witnessing his father being shot down by the Ku Klux Klan, to the time he became a gangster, and then eventually which led to his incarceration, and then under the influence of Elijah Muhammad he becomes a Muslim convert, to becoming one of the most outspoken African-American men who wanted to believe that his fellow people should never be afraid to stand up to themselves and to be happy with the skin they're in, and to also separate him and his fellow African-Americans from the white majority. So his views were kind of somewhat radical, but due to his charisma and his ways to get people's attention, many people have looked up to him. Some people looked up to him as a hero, and others may have looked to him as a fearmonger, and that the real peacemaker amongst African Americans is more Martin Luther King, whereas Martin Luther King was more of a peacemaker. Many people have often viewed Malcolm X as a radical. Well, in this movie neither glorifies Malcolm X, but also at the same time never fully demonizes him. In the early scenes we see Malcolm X, played by Denzel Washington, starting out as a criminal under his accomplice named West Indian Charlie, played by Delroy Lindo. He starts by robbing houses along with his assistant Shorty, played by Spike Lee, and joining him for the ride is a hot young blonde named Sophia, played by Kate Vernon, with whom he chooses as a love interest over a much well-behaved Catholic African-American girl named Laura, played by Teresa Randall. Later on, Malcolm ends up incarcerated, and then eventually opposes the biblical teachings of Chaplain Gill, played by Christopher Plummer, and seems more on the side of African-American Muslim convert named Baines, played by Albert Hall. Once he's discharged, he becomes one of the top followers in the Nation of Islam under the influence of Elijah Muhammad, played by Al Freeman Jr. He also eventually changes his name from Malcolm Little to become Malcolm X, as a way to symbolize that he just does not have a surname, and that Little was the name of a slavery owner. So therefore, Elijah Muhammad declares that he drops his last name and just simply goes by Malcolm X. Malcolm X becomes a charismatic celebrity, while the white press so arbitrarily decided to lash out controversy towards this young radical. As his bravado increased proportionately, the Nation of Islam become envious about it, while the Nation of Islam becomes part of a scandal which involves Elijah's illegitimate children. Malcolm eventually marries another Muslim convert. Her name was Dr. Betty Shabazz, played by Angela Bassett, and they end up raising 3 wonderful daughters. Eventually, by around the late 60s, he then makes a religious journey to Mecca and declares that not all Caucasians are entirely evil, as he was brainwashed by the Elijah Muhammad. When he returns to America, he breaks ties with the Nation of Islam and establishes a rival church that fits the modern spirit at the time. The Nation of Islam did not take this very well, and while at the Audubon Hall in Manhattan on February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was beginning a speech when a disturbance takes shape. Malcolm tries to calm everybody down, but as the result eventually ends up getting gunned down. One of the shooters was his former friend Baines. Now, even though the movie itself was very high in terms of budget, and in spite of the gargantuan production costs, Denzel Washington was nominated at the Oscars for Best Actor in a Leading Role, but he was sadly ousted by Al Pacino for his role in Scent of a Woman. Washington eventually had to wait several years later before winning the Leading Actor Oscar for the film Training Day. This wasn't his first Oscar. His first one actually was back in 1989 as he played an African-American military soldier in the 1989 movie Glory, but he actually won Best Supporting Actor there. But in 2001 he did actually finally won the Leading Actor Award, and I believe he became the first African-American to win the Best Leading Actor Award. What did I think of this film? The film itself is really quite accurate in the time period and the time period close, making it feel very authentic. And the lingo spoken by the characters was very appropriate during the time period. I had no problems with the acting, especially from Denzel Washington. The supporting cast was also very, very convincing, and I think it's about as good as it gets. And yes, I do feel that this movie should have also been nominated for Best Picture. And Spike Lee, who of course seems to make a lot of mainstream movies, once again I found him to be shut out in this movie, because I think he also should have been in position for Best Director. It was just too bad that the Oscars decided to go with other movies and to kind of like shut this one out, which is a bit of a crime shame. That being said, the scenes in this film were definitely well filmed, especially the uproar during Malcolm X's assassination. The use of archive footage was also used very effectively by Spike Lee. And other than that, I don't really have that much of a problem with this movie. But there are a lot of things here in this movie that really bring the movie down. I would love to get given this movie maybe an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Unfortunately, there was a few flaws in this movie that only made me want to give it a 6. Now, I know a lot of people would probably frown upon me for just giving this movie a 6. But then again, that's their opinions. Remember, this is my channel, so I can make whatever decisions I want. Sure, it was praised by many, including myself, but there were still quite a few issues that didn't sit very well with me. Some of these were just small nitpickings, while others were much more macro, that truly hindered the film from being anything but perfect. Where to start was the singing performance by Mickey Howard. She was supposed to play the part of like Billie Holiday, or at least sing like Billie Holiday. However, though, her voice doesn't even come close to even sounding like her. Anybody who listens to jazz or big band era stuff know Billie Holiday's familiar voice. And I mean, my late grandfather would know Billie Holiday's voice like from the back of his head, since my late grandfather was an aficionado of big band and jazz music. It wouldn't have really hurt it if she would have just lip-synced from a Billie Holiday soundtrack, and it would have been more convincing. And I really do think Spike Lee should have known better. The more other obvious falsifications come from the character of Sophia. I mean, she's hanging out in an all-black girls' nightclub, and she just freely, arbitrarily throws herself into Malcolm's arms with no real indication as to who he really is. I'm sorry, but that was very illogical. It's just a scene designed to get the male viewer's attention, and it would never happen to you, even if you have the looks that Denzel Washington possesses. It also seems strange that the Nation of Islam has a hostile attitude towards Washington, who at the time looked decent, a well-caring family man who loved his wife and kids. I mean, did Denzel Washington munch on pork rinds at the time? Your guess is as good as mine. Another unanswered question stems from the scene where he stands up to the cops after they unmercifully beat the tar out of a black man. Malcolm brings in a group of identically dressed people similarly dressed like him to await for his command. Where did he find them? And how did they fall into his lead? And what's the purpose of them acting like soldiers? To me, they're just out there to look cool behind the camera, if nothing else. And finally, I must wonder, who does Malcolm X truly stand for? He transforms from a thief in his early years to a radical Islamic, and finally reconsiders his thoughts long enough, and before you know it, he's murdered. Sure, his mission was for equality, but his execution was definitely more radical rather than peaceful. He was separated from most of his life and wanted his fellow people not to anticipate anything the white majority did, and joined a church who eventually turned against him by having him killed. These quibbles are what really brought this movie down. I think some editing should have been greatly desired, as this movie went on too long and many scenes needed further explanation. But other than that, the performances were excellent, and Washington acted his heart here, as well as the other performers. But the illogical scenarios brought this film down from being an absolute masterpiece. That's why, like I said before, this movie only really deserves a 6, because of the unanswered questions. Maybe it's just me being picky, but I do think that some explanations could have been more further extrapolated, instead of just, making us guess or making us draw our own conclusions. Because when you do a biopic like Malcolm X, you can't draw your own conclusions. What had happened in Malcolm X's life had happened, and there's nothing anybody could do about it or change it. The old, you can't change the past. I don't know what happened 50 years ago. I don't know if it's even historically accurate. But that's beside the point. I mean, the performances were great, the costumes were excellent, and I really don't have that many quibbles, except for those major features that really brought the film down. I know people might frown upon me, but, you know, that's just my opinion. I'm not bashing this film at all. Well, I guess this kind of ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. Remember, subscribe to me, come visit my channel, and if you want to write any comments, do so. But just remember, be kind, be courteous, and I will be back again with another review. So until next time, this is Eric Correct Writer saying, take care of yourself, everyone. Goodbye.